you create a sample story flow, how the flow is supposed to go. What will happen when customer first comes to your website? So the first thing that customer might come and do is greet you, and then the bot is supposed to greet back, and then the customer is supposed to ask you the next question, or inform you about something. So for example, in our case, you'll say that customer comes and says hi, the bot is supposed to greet back, and the customer then asks a follow-up question that I need a hospital, and the bot is supposed to understand that, and then either respond back with the hospital address or should ask follow-up questions, right? So where do we define those? All that piece go in the stories.md file. So the first piece you see here is the comment. So these here are actually comment. Unlike nle.md, where this line means something, where you're actually defining this is intent greet, and you're defining intent goodbye. In stories, these are just comments for you. You can define as many happy paths, sad path you want to do, and you design a flow. So for example, when the customer first comes in, the word with a star is the utterances that customer might say. So where do these values come from? These greet, if you remember, they're coming from our nle.md greet, right? So the flow goes that customer comes and greets you with one of these utterances, hey, hello, hi. Then the bot is supposed to reply back. Bot is supposed to reply back with something called utter greet, and then customer would say how his day is going. In this utter greet, if you remember the first chatbot we built, it asks that how is your day going, and the customer is supposed to reply back with if he is happy, the flow will be he's going to reply with intent called mood great. So in mood great, we would have defined that he's really good, and customer is supposed to, bot is supposed to reply back with that he is happy to hear that we are happy, and is going to say goodbye. In the sad path, we say it is greet, the bot is supposed to reply back. So all the one which are hyphen are like simple chat flow, right? So if we look here, a sample here, this is the customer utterances, this is the bot response. Customer utterances, bot response, right? So it's the exact same way we are doing here. Customer uttered something, bot is supposed to reply back. So you define your stories here, that how would a typical flow would look like. So right now, we haven't touched this file, and that is why you will see all the utterances for our sample chatbot which we built, where it was asking about your how's your day going and try to cheer you up with a cup photo. So these are some of the flows that we came up with. Okay, so this is the stories.md file that where we're going to define our flow, that what happens when we try to search for a medical facility. So all that stories are going to get added here. Okay. So after that, we have looked at that. What is this stories.md file? Let's continue on. So stories, as I explained, contains three main parts: story name, intention name, and actions. So user greeting stories are all defined with the intent, where whatever we have specified in the nle.md. The customer responses are called actions, and the story names, as a specified, you can put in anything. I can call this flow as a facility search story, and then just type in something. It doesn't matter what we define. These are for people to understand what is the flow about. Okay. So to understand a user story, there are we'll see what is an optional and declarative. Where do those values come from? So we have seen those. Now there are two type of actions. One is called utterance. One is called custom action. So what are these utterances and custom options? So utterances are predefined responses that a bot is supposed to reply back. So if you I'll go back to the example of Siri, right? When you ask Siri, Siri, do you have parents? It usually come up with one or two canned responses that I'm a bot and I was built in a lab, right? Or it would come up with some funny response. So if you keep asking that same question multiple times, you'll see that it has a limit of like 4 or 5 different responses. It just keep juggling between the two and come up with this exact same wording every single time. So utterances are exactly that. They're canned responses. If you say how much is 2 plus 2, or it is always going to come back with 4 if it is not doing any calculation. If you say how much is 2 plus as many stars in the sky, you come up with those sort of random thing, and bot understand that it's a nonsense question. It is always going to come back with a sample response. So utterances are those. Custom actions are where you want to do something different. Like we'll see in our case, we want to search against a database of all the hospital in the United States, and you can either maintain it in a file, you can read it from a website, you can read it from some API. So those are the places where you want to do something different as in you have to calculate something, or you have to look up some data. You may have to combine 2 or 3 backend. For example, one backend, one API, for example, is going to give you a list of just the hospital name, and from that hospital name you need to look up another website that where is this hospital, and then a third website where you have to say, okay, what is the address of this hospital. So if you do those sort of complex stuff, you would want to do custom action. Another scenario is, say you were calling an API and you put in that the hospital in a certain zip code, and the API gives you back just the address. Now you want to append some sentences before or after. For example, if the API came back with the address, so let me give you one example that we'll be looking at. So here is the service which we'll be using to look up the address, right? So when I call this API for a hospital, let me increase the size. So when I call this API to look up a hospital, it is going to come back with these values, right? So now I can show this exact value to customer. I want to add that sentence like, here is the hospital that you looked for, and the address is, and then I have to combine multiple fields to come up with the address, and then I have to say something like, hope everything looks good, and you will be happy because they have XYZ facet. So you want to append some values, transform the data and all that. So for those, you would be using a custom action. So let's go ahead and add a story. So we'll look at the exercise 2, session 1. So let's open that. Live workshop and session 1, exercise 1. So the first thing we are going to do is add the below stories. We are going to add a search hospital happy path. So I'll just copy paste and I'll explain what we are doing. Okay, so we are adding the story when customer tries to search a hospital, and this is the happy path flow where nothing can go wrong. Customer greets, the bot is supposed to greet back, and the customer is supposed to say that I'm looking for a hospital facility in a XYZ location, and the bot is supposed to take an action on it. We are using action because now we don't want a canned response. We want to look for a specific hospital in St. Louis, right, or in Charlotte. So for that, the bot has to do something. So we are defining that as action. And the way we define utterances, the 2 type of action is, we append the word utter followed by the word any word of your choice, utter, greet, and any custom action, you start with the word as action followed by what you're trying to do, and then the customer would say thanks, bot would reply back goodbye. So the that's how we add a story. Let's see what are we supposed to do next. So we're going to look at the predefined bot utterances. Always start with these. Now we're going to add few more stories so model can learn, right? So we are now going to add a story where customer hasn't provided any zip code or city. So in that case, the bot is supposed to ask them that what is your location. So I'm going to add that another story here. So here, if the customer has only provided the facility tab, and if you remember where are these value coming from, why do we have to add this is, if you actually look here, right? In cases where we are only providing word as I need a hospital, right? So if you see here, if I type I need a hospital, you would see that it found an entity as search facility and it found the intent as search provider. And now if we try to put in I need a hospital in Charlotte. Okay, so now you'll see that we have found two entities, search facility and location. So what it does is, based on what customer has asked, it is going to say in the story that my NLU came back with two entities, facility type and location. Then I'm supposed to just search the facility. When my NLU response comes back with just one entity example is hospital, right? When it comes back that you only provided me with the search facility and the entity is equal to facility, search facility, then I have to ask a follow-up question, right? For example, location equal to Charlotte. So here it is customer bot is going to ask you a canned response. Can you provide your location as city or zip code? So customer is again going to inform. So when you say inform, so these are what customer has asked. So for example, if I type just as a word as Charlotte and see, so you'll see that the intent is inform and we are providing a location. So that is why over here we are saying that the next intent is inform and customer has provided an entity as something, and that entity type is label is location. Then I'm going to start the search, because now I have all the materials to do a lookup from a third party service or from a database. So we define that story as well. The next item we're going to look at is the next step in there. So the next part says, so now we will try and train the model, okay? And you will see an error. So let me just come out of this. Let's train this now. So you'll see that I'm not typing a RASA train NLU. So you tried RASA train NLU when you have added some more intent. Since we didn't add any extra intent, we are now just going to train the whole model. When you type RASA train, it trains only the core, that is the dialogue management piece, which is stories.md file. It is trying to create. So now you'll see a small error showing up. So let's read this. So it says, cannot access class action facility search as name is not registered action in domain. So which means that there is something out there which we haven't configured, and now we'll learn about domain. What is a domain and what does it do? So once you see this, we need to tell our chatbot what are different things that are available out there, right? So that comes under chatbot domain. So what is a domain? So think of domain as a chatbot universe, right? So when to give you a real life example, when you're growing up, right? Say like, for example, take example of my kids. When right now my youngest one is 3.5 years old, right? his domain, his universe is his parents and sister and a couple of friends who live next door. He doesn't know anybody else. And now when I ask him that go and say hi to XYZ person who he hasn't seen ever, he is shy. So our chatbot is exactly the same way. If it doesn't understand or is not familiar with the intents that have been added or any stories it has added, it will simply start throwing it. It says that I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand that. So domain consists of something called slots and custom action. So slots are context holders. So anybody with any programming language experience, think of slots as variable to hold some values. And in chatbot context, what that means is it is going to use those to understand the context. For example, when we finish this whole thing, right, and you try and search, find me a hospital, and then chatbot comes and says, what is the location? You provide Charlotte, and it is going to find a hospital for you. Next, you type, find me a nursing home. This time, chatbot won't ask you for the location because it has saved your previous location, the context that you're looking for a nursing home in Charlotte because your previous search was about hospitals in Charlotte. So slots is the place which holds all that context for you, and it can do certain things based on that, like suggestion that this hospital is very expensive, don't go here, and so on and so forth. So in the domain, it saves 4 things. It saves the known intents which you have created. So in the NLE.md, whatever intents you have defined, they need to be understood by bot. What are the responses that bot can reply back with? So when I say responses, I'm talking about these values which we created: utter greet, utter cheer up. So the bot needs to know that you have defined something for me to greet, but I don't understand that until you define in my domain. And what should I respond back with? Next, memory, what to hold for context. This is where the slots come into picture. And then the last one is decision, how to respond back. What should I respond back? Should I respond back with a predefined response, or should I respond back using a custom action by looking a value from some other place, either my database or from some website, and do some transformation or any calculation is required, I can do that. So those sort of custom action goes in here. So let's explain, let's explore the domain first. Let's see where is this domain coming from. Okay, so if I open, so domain comes in under your let's go to the exercise first. Exercise 2. Okay, so we're going to open the domain.yaml file. So my domain.yaml file is in the main folder, domain. So these are a predefined domain. These were created when we created the sample chatbot. So if you see, there are 4 sections, right? There is intent, there are responses, and there is something called session config. So let's look at the 2. So far, you'll see that based on what I've defined, we only see intent and responses. There is no slot, there is no custom action. We're going to add that as we proceed. So let's look at the first 2. So here we have defined all the intents that we want him to be aware of. We want the chatbot to be aware of intent: greet, goodbye, inform, search provider, bot challenge, and zip, right? So we have added those, but bot doesn't know those, right? So we need to make chatbot aware that there are some new intents, there are some new stories, some other values which need to be added, and that is why the bot was throwing an error. It understands what is utter greet. When I'm supposed to reply back with something, where are my canned responses? They're all defined over here. That utter, that help utter happy. Session config is how long should it hold the context information in the memory. For example, if I start a session with the chatbot and ask him what are the home loan rates in Charlotte for a car for a house that is 10 years old. and bot replies back, I have a follow-up question, but I wait for like 15 minutes. And then I ask a follow-up question that are you also adding the crime rate in the area when calculating the loan rate? Because 15 minutes have passed and my defined time is 60, it won't remember the context. It'll forget. So if you guys have watched a movie called what was that, Drew Barrymore, 50 First Date, right? In that movie, you would have seen a character where the person had a health issue where he could only remember last 10 seconds of conversation. After that, it used to forget. In the case of Drew Barrymore, she was only able to remember the last 24 hours of the day. After that, everything goes back to her old memory because of some accident. So the bot is exactly the same. That it will remember anything up to 60 seconds. So you can increase the time depending on your scenario. So for now, we'll leave it over here. We saw what is a domain.yaml and what goes in there. So let's see what else is there in the exercise. Okay, so once we opened, we understood why bot complaints. Let's see what did the bot complain of. So the bot complained that it cannot access the action search facility because we have defined this in a story here that there is something we want to do with action search facility, but it doesn't know. So we need to define that in our domain.yaml file somewhere over here, right? So let's see what we do. So now we'll look at all the intent NLU.md. We found the missing intent. There are two other things that it is complaining, that we are not able to find the inform and search provider. So we're going to add these two under intent. So inform and search provider here, we never added them, so we need to let the bot know. So under intent, we'll add these two. I'll fix this. Okay. So now we have defined the intent. Are there any extra responses which we have defined? Let's see. We have utter greet, utter cheer up. We haven't defined anything for action facility search, so we're going to add that as well. There is another one, utter ask location, which we added somewhere over here. Yeah. Utter ask location. This is a canned response where we want the bot to ask you for a location. So we need to add that in the responses section. So we'll add that first. I'm just going to copy paste this thing. Dump it over here. Okay, so I added this. And so now what about all the entities which we have defined, right? So here, if you see, we have defined that there is an entity called location. There is an entity called search facility. So these also need to be defined in our domain file. So what we'll do is we're going to add that as well. For that, we'll define place for entities. So anything that goes in the stories or the NLU.md, anytime you touch, all these three files are related. NLU, I don't know what's happening. Okay, Chang, I'll need your help to create one more link and post it out.
Yeah, I think we can actually reuse the same link.
Okay.
So
okay.
like if you like as a host, you join the same link, it will just spin up the same meeting with the same meeting ID and password.
Okay, I'll try that. Otherwise, I'll put the link in the Slack window.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we're going to add the entity. I think I need to hurry up a little bit. So we're going to add the entity here as well. That there are two entities which we have defined as a part of this exercise: facility type and location. Okay, so now bot knows our intent, entity, new responses. There are still few pieces missing. We have to also define a custom action that we want to do something which we haven't built yet. So we're going to define the actions as well. Okay, and I think that is all for now. I think we have to also come up with the slots. We'll see that, but for now we'll just train the model, and then we'll see how that model performs. So again, if I do RASA train, so right now you'll see that something has changed in that domain. We added some data, so you'll see that in the log. And there is one more piece I wanted to show you. Yeah, you'll see a warning here. Let it finish. Let's see. You'll see a warning here which says found unknown intent. Thanks on line 138. Please make sure that all intents are there in the YAML. So we're going to fix that issue as well, but right now it's a warning, so we'll ignore it and let it train in the background. And the next step is train the model. Word fix this. So this I've left it as DIY task for you. You guys can go and remove that. RASA train NLU I already explained. Now we're going to test our model. And we'll see how the bot responds now. So now you'll see a one-on-one conversation with the bot. You'll still see error when it tries to find a hospital for you, because we haven't defined how to find the hospital. Okay. So let it start. It's taking way longer. Let me just disconnect and start again. Okay, looks like it came through. So let me see. Okay, so it came back, hey, how are you? I'm going to say good. And after this, I can go and ask. So now you'll see right now it's behaving a little bit erratic, right? So we're going to fix all that. So now I'm going to ask the right question without getting the formalities. I need a hospital in Charlotte, and I'll see an error that it is search facility is not defined in the domain. Please make sure all entities are listed in there. So, and also action search facility is not defined, that it doesn't know what it is supposed to do, what action it's supposed to do, where should it get the address from. So that hasn't been defined. So what we'll do is we'll now go ahead and see what to do next on how to resolve this issue. Okay. So we're going to stop. So let's say now we're not going to ask him to find the facility. We wanted to ask a follow-up question of I need a doctor, and I'm not going to provide any data. So now you'll see it is asking me, can you please specify your city or zip code? So which story flow got called here is the second flow that we talked about. We greeted it, it uttered the greet, then we asked for I need a hospital, and it found facility hospital, and it is calling this flow now. So utter last location. Now if you see, it is following a very crude way of maintaining a context. So now if I simply provide Charlotte, okay, you would see that it understands that it is going to combine that. We're trying to look for I need a doctor in Charlotte. It is able to maintain that, and we'll learn how is it able to maintain that context. And now you'll see an error because it say that action search facility is not defined, but it is able to follow the story through. Okay, so moving on.
Wait. So the whole idea is that it will remember the context, as in like it will kind of like remember
Correct.
the sequence of your user input.
Correct. So it was, if it was like the fish in Finding Nemo that only remembers for 5 seconds, after my sentence I need a doctor, and if I would have just provided Charlotte, it would not have understood anything, because it is holding a context. When I say Charlotte, it understands that the word Charlotte is in context with the intent which I specified for finding a doctor, and it is able to combine that. Okay, he needs a doctor from in Charlotte, and is able to call the next next thing in the flow that I need to do, look up something in the action search facility, and it is able to follow the flow that way. Okay, so now we're going to in the next exercise we'll see how to fix those custom action error, and we're going to add a very simple pre-built addresses. No matter what you look for, it is simply going to give you back the same address, so that we can complete the flow, and then we'll link it with a third-party API. Okay, so slots. The next item we need to look at is slots. So right now it is if you don't provide any slots to hold something, it is by default able to do it by something called policies, which we'll see later. But imagine if those policies were not there to help you out to maintain the context. One way of holding the conversation context is using slots. So this is exactly similar to variables, or if you have ever used a JavaScript, the word let a equal to 2, let pi equal to 3.14. If you want to hold those sort of value, use variables, right? So they're saved as a key value pair. Okay, so the way it works is, if you want the bot to be reminded of the extracted values, right? So if I want to say I'm looking for a hospital in San Francisco, it identifies that the location, this entity is label is location, so it's going to say, okay, location equal to San Francisco. Now if I ask a follow-up question that find me a nursing home, and if I haven't provided any city, it is going to look at in its memory, do I have a location from the previous question? Yes, then it is going to simply give you the value back, right? So there are different type of slots available. There are text, there are Boolean, categorical, float, list, and unfeaturized. So text are they are like optional values. You can save them, and the bot is not going to complain whether you pass that value or not. We'll see an example of that. Boolean is a must-have. So if you define a domain as Boolean, so think of these tags Boolean as in any programming language where you define that what kind of variable is it. If in